So I came up with 3 or 4 or 5 very simple but very broad questions, and then what I will ask the panelists after I read them is to give an open answer, doesn't need to go through all of them. So I will ask each of you to have a 2 or 3 minutes statement, and then let's just start to debate, and please be as much controversial as possible. Then I will open to the floor, and let's see how it goes. Is AI really useful for you? And when I say for you, is that your personal or specific professional work? Because I mean, AI is already answering my emails. I use Gmail, and not, sometimes I'm happy, sometimes I'm afraid. So how is useful? Are orders of magnitude that change dramatically your work? How? That will be interesting to know. And who are you depending on? So do you feel in some way hostage from a vendor, or you are using legacy things? And have you realized how much your work depends on certain pieces of work? I mean, Rio just highlighted it's a very limited, it's a club of organizations that are able to train certain data sets. So what do you need for the next iteration of artificial intelligence? What do you want? What do you expect? Please dream. And at the same time, what are you worried about? Are the ethics something that concern you more than other things? I mean, we can all just jump on the wagon of, oh, AI is good or bad, the ethics, but there are many other ethical issues and have been through the history of mankind, so we cannot blame it just. Is the cost? Are the inconsistencies? Are we worried about black boxes and the black swans, which is something that I've seen many, many times, and people say, oh, we didn't see it coming, and sometimes I can argue, oh, you didn't plan accordingly. So these are the open questions, and I will invite the panelists to make a brief introduction, starting with Jeffrey. And there is microphones there, which should be working.
Thank you.
Doesn't have AI to turn.
It was an intel.
Should issue a warning message. So I'm not quite certain I'm answering the questions, but I would comment that I think there is some difference between.
Yeah, doesn't have AI to tell you it hasn't done that.
Actually, it's working.
Is it working?
Hello?
Yes.
Okay. So I think there is some difference in the status of AI in the vision areas and the large language model areas than in sort of the rest of the world. In many fields, I think AI is only just being applied. Its promise is not quite obvious, and in particular, I think for several scientific applications, you are doing a rather different problem from the vision and the language models, and as far as I can see, the current AI does not do very well in representing fields where there's a large variation in magnitude of the results, because the activation layers are around unity, and how you can use an activation layer around unity when the results vary by, say, 3 orders of magnitude is not so obvious to me. I don't think it's doing a very good job. So I think we're actually in some areas pretty near the beginning, and this looks, I'm pretty optimistic, it's promising, but I think we're in a rather different situation from Google and Microsoft and Tesla in their well-explored commercial areas.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, so the question is AI useful? Of course it's useful in many ways. When I shop, I use AI, for example. It's amazing with the recent proliferation of all these vision models and language models like ChatGPT and so forth, enabled browsers and so forth. How much of the human activities and so-called intelligent activities seem to actually be a repetition of mundane tasks, right? So it's a rat-dog movement, basically, or the calculator movement. So many of the, writing essays or legal counsel, whatever, will likely be heavily augmented, if not replaced, or maybe replaced by these AI. I mean, that's inevitable. Well, that said, so there's an interesting a new study to augment these language models with to do things like fact checking, where they refer to, they would do web search, or they would even call a calculator to calculate things. Okay, so 3 plus 4 equals 7, but that's very hard for a language model to come up with, but so they would call a calculator to calculate that. Well, that's fine for a language model because the response comes back rather instantaneously in modern computers. However, think of the 3 plus 4 calculator being this whole simulation, right, which will take a century. Would the AI be calling that? Well, if you're a scientist, if you're a human scientist, what would you do, right? As a human intelligence, would you be will be invoking a simulation that you know will take a century? Of course not, right? Because it's not going to be useful. Though, of course, you may argue that the AI may actually calculate how much this simulation may take, and thus decide not to actually invoke the simulation. But that's exactly what the humans will be doing. And with that, the real value of the scientific discovery will be in the scientific simulation and not the AI itself. Right? And this is exactly, so it coincides with what Jeffrey said. So I think the exciting moment, so this AI, the ChatGPT, these generative AI, is still mundane to me, in that it's only replicating what the humans do in mundanely and sort of established tasks. And true creativity or discovery in science and the use of AI thereof in combination with what will enable discovery, which is more outright things like downright simulation, would be something that would be exciting to me. And that's starting to happen. And I think that's more exciting for humankind than ChatGPT.
And would that happen within our timelines? Because I'm old enough, but I used to be a math lecturer, and I used to make even money by teaching students how to extract the square root manually.
Yeah, but that's mundane.
Correct, but the question is how these things that we're discussing today will become mundane tomorrow. That's when is the tomorrow is going to happen, if.
Well, the question is, do people, would it require people to be taught a whole bunch of mundane things to start be able to discover things? And will the use of these tools compromise that? That was the same calculator argument, right? When calculators were invented, it was argued that people would lose their math skills because of this. I think it's the same argument. I think that's very difficult to answer right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree with Satoshi that these things are replacing more and more parts that we previously thought were require intelligence. If you think about how a difficult problem is decomposed into these smaller mundane tasks, I think we are going to the next sort of level of abstraction. I think our definition of intelligence is still very primitive. I think certain aspects of what we call intelligence now will be broken down into what we previously didn't think were mundane tasks. I think more and more of these things will become distinctive, and what we think is an intelligent task now, part of it will be offloaded to what we call AI at the moment. But I think it's this sort of more precise definition of what we think is intelligence is very important to where we find these tools to be useful. I think it depends on how precisely we can define what is intelligence.
But when you mention intelligence and definition and precision, going back to my mundane example of square root, the beauty of that example is that there is no two interpretations of a square root. Everywhere in the world, a square root is that. Now, if we ask for certain other mundane tasks, they could be cultural implications or any sort of, that's the colonization side of things. So, Andrea, could you disagree or agree?
Yeah, I find it really interesting that we can look at lectures with complicated maths. Laura, I have to admit, I didn't understand all your maths. But computers can understand all this complicated maths, but we can't make a robot that can walk into this room and sit on a chair. The thing that's most easy for us is actually one of the hardest things for us to make a machine to do. For me, what I notice a lot is Codeplay is all about the foundational technologies on top of which we build technologies like AI. And so I'm very concerned about building solid foundations on top of which to build other things. And running a business and having to find funding and things. I do think we've been living through the age of bullshit. And a lot of our modern world is powered by bullshit. You know, that's what gets you the funding.
As it consumes a lot of power.
It does, yes. But it seems to generate a lot of funding. So if you can do it right, you know, you can fund good work, but a lot of bad work gets funded by that. I think my more recent experience was discovering that when things go wrong, like when there's a cyclone or an earthquake or something, people suddenly want solid foundations again, and they start thinking about those foundational technologies. So at Codeplay, we're putting a lot of effort into things like self-driving cars. We're not building self-driving cars, but we're building the foundational technologies and going, how do we make sure that what we build those AI technologies on top of is safe?
So we have been hearing a lot about the compute power required here and there, but what about the network and what about the communication? So Karen, which are the demands on that side of, you are in the forefront of optical photonics?
Sure, but if it's okay, I'd like to make a comment about the previous question a little bit.
And all the comments that you want.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that we're kind of at an existential moment. So I spent half my time educating, and so I think deeply about, you know, how do we, you know, how are we going to educate what is the right way to educate the next generation of students? I mean, I know that there's the easy example of, well, you know, it was a calculator and now we use it as a tool. Mm-hmm. But this is much more than that. It's much deeper. You know, clearly, AI is going to be a very important tool in our future. You know, from the education side, I think about, you know, I'm teaching my students electromagnetics or whatever, you know, I need to figure out a way to make, you know, right now, you know, the GPT can basically and get hundreds on my exams. My exams are not that sophisticated. So, but I still need the students to not necessarily, you know, get the mundane knowledge, but learn how to think abstractly, learn how to think, you know, critically, right? And so I think it's going to revolutionize, or it has to revolutionize, the way we teach and interact with our students. And to me, that's a huge challenge right now. I don't think we have, you know, I don't really see a clear path yet. It's a process that will take the entirety. I mean, not even just students. I think the whole community.
Yeah. And I won't dispute that comparison against my big scale of square roots manually. But at the time, it was a huge frustration because you needed to put together you were teaching all the operations, all the thinking, all the organization. It was a number of things that suddenly disappeared just because someone did this. And immediately created a digital divide, the ones that actually had the calculator versus not. In my time, it was mid-70s in Uruguay. We were, I mean, the cool guy at the class had that calculator, the others not. The cool guy of today has access to those databases. I mean, I just read this morning, I think that it's either Google or Microsoft is charging $20 per month to access the best version of ChatGPT. So I'm not trying to minimize just the analogies in terms of human nature is how I'm trying to think. Now, Tina, you are actually in the business of building this stuff, or the stuff under the things. So what's your approach? And after that, I will open the floor.
Yeah, okay. So well, yes, we're building machine to be able to run AI training better, that's for sure, but I still also want to comment on how I see AI versus humans' role in this. I think the way I see AI is just still, maybe it's just where I am. I don't work with AI, daily, but I still see that it is the humans' creativity that I don't see that in AI. I still see AI being a more and more efficient tool, more powerful tool to enable human if you choose. I really enjoyed the last talk from Professor Koto, that I think it's the humans constantly looking at, say, okay, so we're training with image, we're getting more powerful, but then we have limitation, we have problem, we have machine, we have the runtime, how many million hours, then how do we solve the problem? And then we do synthetic imaging, and then with that, then I'm sure lots of intelligent thoughts research have to go into to say, how do we make this image to be representative? How do we make sure that image is comprehensive? So I felt like humans' creativity can rise on top of AI, and it really frees us up to allow us to be more freedom in creativity. I mean, even ChatGPT, then right away, there's people recognize, say, how do we create a tool to recognize this paper is generated by ChatGPT? I'm sure this person who wrote this are using, some kind of AI, right? So to me, AI is still a tool if we're it can free us from being more creative, being more productive.
Yes, let's open the debate.
So do you think one of the things we learned going through the functional safety stuff in driving cars is that a lot of it is about how you communicate what your technology can do, and so humans can understand it. So for example, if you use a search engine, it's a statistical model, it's giving you a set of results, you understand that, and so you know some of the results may or may not be relevant for you, and you pick the right ones.
I still control the decision.
You still control the decision, yeah. Whereas if you ask, a model like ChatGPT to answer your question, it's a statistical model. So it may be often right, but it is quite capable of just making up nonsense that looks like convincing nonsense. And that is the challenge with these systems, is if it looks like it's doing something. We have the same thing, in cars. If somebody sees their car driving itself for 2 days, they go, oh, it's obviously capable of driving itself safely. But a human, on average, is capable of driving a car for 100 million miles without a major accident. That's how much you need to test, and that's a lot. So we've got to communicate to people what the system is and isn't doing. And the problem with ChatGPT is what it is doing is making it look like it's communicating like a human.
But is it a step in the right direction?
It's a fantastic step forwards, but we've got to be careful.
You didn't answer the question.
It's a fantastic step forwards, but we've got to be honest about what it is. It's not answering a question.
Yes.
It is not. That's not something that ChatGPT is doing. It's just making it look like it's answering the question. That's quite a different thing.
Should I open to the floor? It was at the back in the corner. Oh, there are many hands. Okay, no. Philip, there on the corner.
Is Mark Moore in the room?
Yep, thank you.
He is? Is Mark here? No.
No, wait, Duncan, please.
Kia ora, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's actually my first time participating as part of a discussion. I'm a delegate from Victoria University. I'm not sure if my supervisor is here, but
You can speak freely.
Okay, I don't think she's here, but we're more so come from a background of network engineering, software engineering, not necessarily high performance, but there's an overlap and we've learnt a lot. I just wanted to touch on the second point. So coming from education, I think Kieran touched on this, is that oftentimes with student success, it's a measurement of how well you score rather than how much you have learnt. And so we're always thinking of new ways to keep up with technology. A lot of the courses as part of the undergraduate program have been taught exactly the same for a decade. And so we're always wanting to modernise the curriculum, and we're very aware that tools like ChatGPT, students are taking use of them because, again, there's an incentive just to pass rather than to learn the content. And students are very busy, a lot of them work, a lot of them have other commitments. And so I wanted to know if you had any perhaps advice as to how educational institutions can embrace new technologies, especially AI-driven ones like ChatGPT, or is there a need to resist these technologies and find new ways of measuring how students have learnt the content, especially if we're accrediting them under some kind of accord that is essentially us promising that students know this information, especially if they go into safety-critical fields where they need those skills to think critically. What kind of advice would you have for that?
So should I ask Karen to start that she brought
Definitely teach these technologies.
I'm sorry?
Definitely teach these new
Well,
technologies.
he said
absolutely.
resist or accept. Maybe there is something in between, which is delay, which is won't happen. So Karen, your thought, please.
I think
It should be on.
Oh, there you go. Okay. So I think you're asking exactly the question that we're all asking. You know, I don't know that there's an answer immediately, but this is exactly what's being debated right now. I'm sure around the world. It's being discussed and debated in my institution, and you know, I think the majority feel that this is a tool, right? And it's something that we need. And by the way, it's very much not stationary, right? Just because ChatGPT cannot do X, Y, or Z right now, with the scale that things are going, it's going to do it like tomorrow. So we just have to kind of assume that. I said that this is an existential moment. I actually feel strongly that it is. This is not like, oh yeah, you know, we human beings, this will be a good tool and we can just kind of be creative. I'm sorry to disagree with my very, very good panelists, but I don't know, if you've seen some of the images that are created, they're much better than some artists that I've known. You know, I mean, what's creativity anyway? So I think it's existential. And so it's great, you know, on one hand, right? Because I think that we have an opportunity to create a new generation of people, including us, right? That can embrace these tools and rise and become, you know, operate perhaps at a much higher level of abstraction.
So
But having said that, let me just add one more comment. You know, I have relatively young boys, right? I mean, in their 20s, and they, you know, I mean, we talked about Google Maps being a digital twin of some sort, right? They don't know how to read a map. They do not know how to read a map. They don't understand, you know, north, south. I'm sorry to say this about my own children, but they just really don't. They never really learned, never really had to. They, you know, Google tells them where to go and they go, and if it tells them to go the wrong place, they don't. So this power of like understanding what the Google search results are, that's kind of based on the knowledge that we've, you know, accumulated so far. But if we, you know, I mean, in the future, if we're not teaching that, they're not going to be able to know, like, oh, the Google is telling me to go the wrong way. Sorry.
So, Jeffrey, you have been on the education system for a few iterations. Is that an existential change, as Karen said, or it will be evolutionary from now?
I guess I don't think we know quite yet. We should do some very vigorous experiments to see what's possible. One sort of maybe related comment is that if you look at students' claimed interests, 80% of the interest is AI. I mean, and hardly any, for instance, is in systems or
compile
That
it.
Virginia is AI, security, and then maybe systems. But systems is maybe 10% of the students. Pretty small. So it means that you have to have a really strong coverage of AI if you want to satisfy entering students, both at the undergraduate and graduate levels.
Now, so Satoshi and Rio, I mean, are these existential questions from a Western point of view, or we are living a globalized view in generic terms?
Yeah, of course, we're living in a global society, and most educational systems are fairly similar. But I don't feel the existential threat, as Karen had mentioned. I mean, it's been repeated throughout history. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we think, a picture seems good because we're trained to think that existing picture looks good. But for example, if you take a look at music, like how much, so there's a huge change from like the early 90s to like the 1950s, 60s, and maybe to the 70s. But since then, the music industry has sort of stagnated. You can see the evidence of this by, see a lot of young kids listen to songs in the 70s and 80s. They think it's the modern stuff because not only they don't know, because the style, there haven't been a new style that's been invented, right? Maybe rap, maybe not much. So that's the area where obviously things like AI will penetrate because it's become mundane.
Mm-hmm.
So any place that any place that's mundane, I mean, let the AI take over because that's not where we should be using our brains. Right? And it's fine for kids not to be able to read Google Maps because we have Google Map already. Why do we need to train kids to read Google Map? We need to train them to do something else. Right? And but the final comments. And again, there are lots of things that AIs cannot do because it hasn't been discovered yet. And that's what we do as scientists, right? Mm-hmm. And in fact, the whole methodology of doing science will change. Because right now, if you ask a biologist, what do they do in science? Right? They do lab experiments. And what do? They keep lab notes. Mm-hmm. They may have a paper note. Well, it's been modernized to some extent these days, but there's still a lot of people write like paper lab notes, which is a totally
anachronic.
Yeah. Well, let's suppose that we have a training model where every experiment they do is censored, and any sort of natural language comment that they observe is absorbed into a training, some sort of some training module, where platforms, let's say with federated learning, that does this for every laboratory, biological laboratory. See, that's sort of a knowledge accumulation system we have to build. Mm-hmm. Again, to get rid of all the mundane stuff so there'll be discovery. So, so AI, so we know how to do this. Just get rid of all the mundane stuff because there will not be necessary.
It's a little bit frightening, the mundane stuff. I mean, I have 3 children. My younger one came to New Zealand speaking no English. Now he doesn't speak Spanish, but he doesn't necessarily care because if he needs a translation, just ask the closer device that he has. And it's a reasonably acceptable thing for the purposes of his communication. So he's not writing Shakespeare or Don Quixote. It's just achieving something.
Well, but again, people with talent learn by example. So it's fine for those who have the eagerness to learn, will still learn. In fact, will learn more effectively by the use of AI through exemplars. And people who have no aspiration, they don't need this. So this that's inevitable. That's how the human, but again, that's been repeated time and time over history. So this is no different.
But I saw an interesting comment the other day, which is that huge amounts of money is being invested in building self-driving cars or self-driving trucks. And actually, you'd be much better creating AI doctors because it's harder to hire doctors than it is to hire drivers. And actually, it's easier to train an AI doctor than it is to train an AI driver. It's actually an easier task to do a lot of AI-based medical diagnosis than it is to drive a car.
A lot of driving is stupid.
So yes, Rio. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Yes, yes.
I think, yeah, technology benefits those who can use it. And I think in the same way that there's a different level of people who can search online, there's already a different level of people who can prompt engineer to ChatGPT to tell them what they want, or Stable Diffusion to generate more accurate images. There's already a huge difference in the degree to which people can use these things. Some people have no clue how to generate nice images or how to make ChatGPT work. In the same way that there are different keywords that make Google output what you want and things that don't. If we don't teach how to use these tools, then people will generally not know how to use these tools. As they evolve, of course, the things we need to teach will keep changing, but we will just need to change our education in a way that, people know how to use these tools as they keep evolving.
Just bringing back, yeah,
It's a whole new job of prompt engineering. It's a new job that was invented in the last few months.
Now,
we'll need university courses in it.
Should we worry about the barriers of entry? Because Jeffrey taught us that it takes billions to train that model, and of course, they make more billions, so as a business model, it worked. But the barriers of entry to create an AI, is that something that we should be worried about? I mean, in the history of humanity, things have changed. Once upon a time, I was taught French in high school because it was the diplomatic language. Who is learning French generically, with all due respect? Cost, barrier of entry, data colonization.
So it's definitely something that...
I'm sorry?
It's that reducing the cost of training models is definitely something that I'm very concerned about and very involved in. How do we get...
Okay, it's a concern. How's it going to happen?
How do we get the compute power down? So the main problem that we have at the moment is that it's very, very hard for the silicon chip companies to design a chip that allows you to train a new model. There's lots of chip companies that can train old models, but it's very, very hard for a chip company to organize themselves in such a way that they can enable people to train a new model.
So it's a sort of industrial revolution.
It's you know what it's about? It's about people. You need software people and hardware people working together.
Time out. I think the other side of the panel has something to say. Is this working?
I think we're working on that, right? I mean, from the hardware side, Karen talked about photonics. I think if you're looking forward, yes. Okay, sorry. I think there's a wide fields out there that we're recognizing the problem of working on this technology. But technology takes time, right? Karen talks about the photonics, it has great potential, but it takes time for industrial to pick up, because this loop, how much it costs, how many people use it, can bring the cost down, but then you need people to get over the barrier. And we also, obviously working on technology being energy efficiency. We recognize the problem. So they are, yeah.
Karen, please. She's from New York. She has personality.
Exactly. So I just want to make. I agree with with Tina. When I said existential, I meant really from the point of view of education, because that's one of the major sides that I come from, and I think it is. I think there is an big education question, and I strongly agree with you, Nicolas, on the issue of disparity across economic classes and things like that in terms of access to the technology, which we've seen over and over again. Yeah. So that's a major issue too. But I just want to separate it out. There's kind of the AI that, at least the way that I think about it, in terms of the what's available sort of in software, and we can solve with simulations and modeling and put into self-driving things and so on, versus the physical world and the biological world, which is always slow, always too slow. Yes, we have AI now, but we're still the same human beings that we were maybe 10,000 years ago, more or less. And so issues of and more to the point, building actual hardware, building systems, building chips, that you just can't like run a model faster and have the chip go faster. It takes, there's kind of a whole ecosystem and manufacturing and fabrication and just physical things that need to happen that will lag behind. So
But you are defining the nature of a supply chain, which is how humanity works. So, yes, Satoshi.
Yeah, so this sort of alluding to some Rio's work or any sort of work that tries to reduce the cost of training by some generic pre-training of some sort or use some pre-trained models. I mean, that's probably the most effective way of reducing a training cost, because to start with something that's pre-trained and augment that with the domain-specific training, even more some new data. Now, but here's the thing. So what's happening is, in the hardware side, the way some of the low precision arithmetic, or even those with some sort of quantization, with the low order bits, is starting to really come to surface with respect to training. Okay? And so those will be very specific to AI training. I mean, the days when we have people use FP32 or maybe like FP19, whatever, there will be lots of commonality with the with the arithmetic we do with simulation. Okay, so if you look at the GPUs, they still have very strong, both HPC characteristics with high bandwidth, with the FP32 and sometimes FP64 capabilities. And then have FP8. If you look at like H100, it's a catch-all for everything. But if if you look at the destiny, if the pre-training allows for additional domain-specific training to be done exclusively in quantized low precision, okay, then that will completely diversify the pathway between HPC simulation and AI training. Whereas if the pre-trained models, if you take any pre-trained models, in order to refine the training, you need to use high precision arithmetic. And this will unify the pathway of HPC and more simulation, HPC simulation, AI, and AI training. And that's one point I'm really interested in, right? Because that will determine the fate of hardware as we proceed forward. Because obviously, like I said, HPC, in order to make new discoveries, you need to have both HPC and AI. But will they be the same hardware or different hardware? That's something I don't know, because that depends on this destiny of the pre-trained model.
So Tina, is that fate of hardware in your roadmap? Should work.
I like what I hear. So I believe that to empower training in the future, it takes a community efforts. It's both software, hardware, thinking things at the system level, or new ways of training. Like I see the synthetic messages in new direction coming out of necessity as well as the recognition, right?
So we are now all using AI in one way or other. So, and I want to relate to an example. I've been using Gmail for pretty much 15 years, and it was free for 14 years. And because I've been a nomad, then it was fine. And the Multicore world email that everyone receives from me, it's a Gmail one. Therefore, Google reads my email. Therefore, some of the answers, if they are short, are not mine, are from Google. So, and Google started to charge me about a year or so, and then I made a conscious business decision. Should I move my client from here and there? You know that, I'm busy. I will just keep selling my soul to don't be evil. That's a silly but real example of being hostage of some sort of AI. And that's the question that I'm asking you. All of you are using it in one way or other. Which is the sense of hostage that you have? Do you want to get rid of some sort of it? I'm not talking about the positive sides of it. Would be, I mean, imagine in the analogy, we all wanted to get rid of Microsoft Teams or Word, but we still use it. Right? Is there a cost relation decision in any of your usages of AI? Andrew?
It does seem very strange to me that we provide all of this data about all of our private emails and photos to these companies, but we're super sensitive about medical data, which could actually be used for training in a much more useful way. Like, why aren't we doing a cost-benefit analysis of thinking, well, medical data would be much more. There's much more value in that, and yet it's way more regulated.
Yeah, we donate our organs, but after.
But the data could be far more useful. There's some questions over there.
There is a question. Yes, Paul has a microphone there. Yes?
So I was kind of curious. There was the talk earlier about existential threat. And I haven't used the AI that generates images, but I have used ChatGPT a little bit. And that's actually very accessible. I mean, sure, they've introduced a per-pay thing recently, but I would argue that, if anything, the threat is not to the underprivileged and underserved who happen to have a smartphone and therefore can interact with it for free, but perhaps to the people who might be resting on laurels or coasting due to a privileged upbringing, one way or another. And I sometimes wonder when people complain about ChatGPT, how much of it is motivated by, I don't want to be caught out by these really people with fire in their eyes and gravel in their gut who are going to take this opportunity and really run with it. So I'm kind of curious what the panel thinks about that sort of sociological implication, and I apologize for the question, but hey.
What I will do is that I will ask, because I see a number of hands, each of you just ask the question, and then the panel will collate and will keep answering whatever they want. Yes, so, no, Duncan behind you. Yes.
Sorry, the moment is almost lost, but this is just a comment. One of the benefits of coming to Multicore World is hearing all sorts of comments that you otherwise wouldn't hear. And yesterday I heard one which has been sent to me in printed form.
A little bit louder, please.
Yesterday I heard a comment about ChatGPT. It's described as mansplaining as a service.
That's why I don't want to give him the mic.
But wait, there's more. There's a female commenter who says, at least it only does it when asked.
David, thank you, Duncan Hall. So, David.
When I was at high school, randomly I ended up working on the part of the software system for a New Zealand Qualifications Authority, and unfortunately at the same time the decision was made to reduce, I guess, the importance of the trades in New Zealand, which has proven to be a challenge for our country for a little while until we've managed to bring that back in. But Andrew made an interesting point. It's hard for AI to sit in a chair or fix your plumbing or look after someone who's sick. And I guess the other point is that all of those jobs we think are so incredibly creative and require huge amounts of particular types of knowledge when you're trying to make diagnoses. Those are actually the jobs that are the most at risk, not of being replaced, but of being significantly augmented so that you need a lot less people to do them. And I think that is an existential risk for kids today, because you're looking at the future, and the jobs that are some of the most well-paying and the jobs that have historically been some of the best and brightest go into are now going to be essentially computer-aided to the point where you're not going to need as many people to do those jobs, and they're going to be able to do them a lot better because they can access these massive, massive data sets. If you're trying to make marketing decisions, you can now make them mathematically. So,
Manisha.
So I have two questions. One is...
No, just louder.
Okay.
There you go.
So one thing is about the scientific discovery. So how is AI exactly going to help us for the scientific discovery as well as the HPC simulations? And the second, earlier it was BERT, today is ChatGPT. What is next? What do you think about it?
So now I will ask the panel to do a sort of closing statement, trying to answer all the questions and beyond. So, Tina, would you like to start? No? Yes? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think Paul mentioned about where, there you talk about the underprivileged perhaps are benefit more about the technology where people well established maybe felt threatened about it, but we didn't get to the other things where I was prepared and talk about, but we run out of time, is where if we talk about AI, what's a threat to people's privacy or to sort of the data, there was the confidentiality and who owns the data. I think it's the underprivileged people who are really skewed in terms of who are the powerful, make all the decision, owns all the data, and profit from it versus people who are underprivileged, probably, they're probably not even aware of what's going on. Actually, that's including myself. I'm most time a user. So I like your question where you says, oh, what's the next AI coming to me? I'm going to say that AR is sort of a part of my life whether I like it or not. Yeah. So actually, I'm going to use a quote because I wrote it down, so I have to use it. So, there's an American historian. So his name is Melvin Kranzberg. So he defined the 6 laws of technology. I thought one of it is very suitable for what we talk about today. So he says the technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. So in your case, yes, you're right. It's not affect everyone the same. So it is not neutral, and it really depends on how we make it to be and how we are very conscious about where it's going to.
Yes.
Sure. Very, very insightful comments, Tina. I think the point you raised, Paul, on the democratization of this knowledge is very well put. In fact, we've seen it already. Again, back to the education business in the form of MOOCs, and you have students from all around from the world who are can educate themselves essentially, and with the equivalent of MIT type level courses. So maybe the existential comment I made is really for my own institution in some ways. And I would go back to the physicality of human beings, which we've all learned over COVID, that there is something about the human interaction and the physicality and having a residential type of education as well. So, yeah. I would, at least within my lifetime, I would bet on it. Fine, yeah, it's okay. That's I think that's, but not to say that it's not going to change. I think it will change for sure. Well, I lost my train of thought. For
yeah, that's
comment,
the ability
so,
that Paul has to make.
I'll leave it to.
Yes, thank you. So, Andrew, let's just follow.
So the early compilers took a job that was done by humans, which would take mathematical formulae and convert them into instructions for the hardware to execute. And compilers definitely did not put computer programmers out of business. That's the opposite of what happened. And so I think the same is true of AI. It's definitely not going to put people who understand it out of business. I think the question about using machine learning for scientific progress, I think is really important because it's connected to your other questions about what's next, right? Is that we're making incredible rapid progress. Just over the last few months, we've seen just incredible new technologies just sprout out of nowhere. But what they have in common is that they look like they're producing good results. The AI-generated art or the AI-generated chat looks like it's doing something right. The AI-generated computer programmers look like the right code, but they might not be. And that's the bit that's missing. I do wonder if that's connected to what your talk was about the training data. We're using training data that's scraped from the internet, that's trained to give something to look good, right? Because people have put lots of effort into making sure their websites, their photos online look good, and that we need to think much more about creating that training data and that's probably the job of the future, is creating data, or I think it's beyond that now. I think we can interact with models to train it, and that's how ChatGPT was changed via interaction. So maybe that is the job, and the technology of the future is about those interactions with the real experts, and that's the next step that we need to make.
Yeah. Yes, for you.
Yeah, so I completely agree. I think interactiveness with AI is going to be the next big thing. Well, maybe it already is. There's reinforcement learning through human interaction, or I think this is, or human feedback, I guess. RLHF is already a big thing. I think science will also progress with the help of AI. So, again, I think we need to change and evolve with our AI so that we can, keep up with the interface, keep up with what it can do. Because if it's going to be interactive, we're going to have to keep up on our side with how AI is evolving. Otherwise, it's going to be faster not to interact with, the slow humans at some point. So that is probably a very important task that we as humans will need to educate ourselves with, so that we can actually keep up with the evolution of AI.
Yeah, okay. So as I had alluded to earlier, I think the way we do science will completely change. For two reasons, which is not in disagreement with my panelists, but one thing is, of course, there are a lot of mundane stuff we do in science. As much as we like to think that science is about objective is to have new discoveries, there are a lot of mundane stuff we have to do in order to make these discoveries, like planning experiments, or for people putting in numbers in Excel sheets, and all those stupid things that would have been pretty much outdated. So all these things, hopefully the AI will eliminate. And also it'll help, just like Rio said, in terms of interactive dialogue. It's not just the interactive dialogue being important, it's the fact that the platform, this AI, new science driven by AI and simulation platform will accumulate knowledge by interaction with the human beings. That's the whole point. Because, like I said, instead of writing stuff in lab notes, every experiment you do, every simulation you do, whatever, it will be input into the system, but it will be annotated by expert knowledge saying, well, this is what I observed. And if every lab does that, instead of each lab, people keeping these private notes, which is, okay, totally, I don't understand this, the culture. Not to put down all the biologists, but this I don't know. Everybody wants to win the Nobel Prize. That's why they want to keep so much secrecy. So we have to work on these federated learning stuff. But assuming we overcome this, then the knowledge, the scientific discovery will be all about interacting with the experiments, interacting with the digital twins, accumulating human knowledge into a platform, and it will be so. Then who will rule the world? Well, he who would build, or he or she, who would build the platform and allow accumulation of this knowledge will control science. Okay? And people who realize this and started to build the platform, like medical platform, whatever, will probably win in the end. Instead of having to write papers. I mean, even paper review will change. The way we do peer review right now is so outdated, and we can just feed it and say, well, the AI will tell us, well, here's something I don't know. Okay, so here are things that's already written in other papers, but here's something that seems new. But can you tell me if this is new? And that will significantly reduce the workload of review, but also allow us to crystallize the new discoveries, which again is very hard for the AI to judge right now. But the AI will be able to ask the humans whether something was new.
So Jeffrey, yes.
Well, there's not much left to say. I would note that, as Satoshi said, AI will remove some mundane tasks, but I'm not certain whether AI will understand the nature of superstring theories. And another example, I try to work on earthquakes. AI did not predict the Turkish earthquake, unfortunately, nor did it predict yesterday's earthquake here. So there are many areas which I think are deeper areas where the role of AI is going to be important, but it may not actually. It's a long way to understand how much help it will give us.
And in an existential mode, and I couldn't avoid the analogy, is that when Satoshi say that the knowledge gets accumulated and the one who builds the platform will control the path, I couldn't avoid the analogy of thinking of the history of mankind, and a lot of knowledge and beliefs and traditions get compiled in a platform which is called the Bible, or in other civilization, or Amazon, or the Amazons. So, and someone could argue, okay, we can argue in borderline heresy that Facebook has more followers than Christianity. Well, that's a different topic. But what I'm trying to say is that if we go deeper, the concept of control or accumulation of knowledge and follow-up, humanity just keep going. And that's what are we going to do after thanking the panel for their intervention. So we are going to take the conference photo. You probably witnessed that I did live a few challenges. You thought that that wasn't on purpose. But we are going to take a photo. We will enjoy in the balcony a little bit of wonderful Wellington wind, and which is another courtesy of the organization of the conference. You cannot leave without having a little bit of wind of Wellington. And then we will have our lunch, which has been modified the time, as you can see in the program. And I've seen a lot of expectation from the floor in terms of dialogue. So someone even requested, let's extend that discussion at between 2 and 3 p.m. You will let me know if the format is panel or just each of us. And then we will have a coffee and we will keep going. Unfortunately, Ilkay Altintas is not going to make it, so that's how we keep readjusting dynamically the program. So please join me saying thank you to the panelists for their time and insight. And now following me for